Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's top 10 episodes of Stargate Atlantis. This video is where I count down my top 10 favorite episodes as well as my 5 least favorite episodes of Stargate Atlantis. So I have to give a spoiler warning for Stargate Atlantis. If you haven't seen all of Stargate Atlantis, you may not want to watch this video, otherwise some things may be spoiled for you. So let's jump straight into it, starting with my bottom 5 least favorite episodes of Stargate Atlantis, starting with my number 5, Doppelganger. The 4th season episode was a wholly unoriginal and poorly executed episode, where some menacing alien creature taking the form of Colonel Shepard and causing some mayhem, rather boring and uninspiring. Number 4 is Trio, the 4th season episode where Colonel Carter, Dr. Keller, and Rodney McKay get trapped in a hole and they can't get out of it, so instead they gossip and have some really boring and uninspired character interactions. This episode not only was boring but ridiculous as well. Number 3 is Harmony. The 4th season episode where McKay and Shepard have to babysit a bratty would-be queen who's self-entitled, loud, and annoying, and in fact the whole episode was incredibly annoying to watch, not to mention unoriginal, uninteresting, lazy writing, relying on tropes that have been done a billion times before and bringing nothing new to the table. Number 2 is Vegas, the 5th season episode, which was a very, very obvious, lame attempt to imitate shows like CSI and other modern day cop dramas by setting it in the parallel universe where Shepard is a cop in Vegas dealing with a couple of wraiths. This episode was so lame. How hard they were trying to be like CSI. Yeah, it's getting all the ratings. Let's try to be like them instead of, actually trying to tell good stories. And my number 1 least favorite episode of Stargate Atlantis is Sateda, the 3rd season episode that pitted Ronan against the former Wraith master that used to hunt him. Was a complete and total mess, and despite it being action-based, I always have a hard time getting through this episode without falling asleep. It's a by-the-numbers action story that's far too cliched for my taste. It offers nothing new and it tries too hard to be all edgy and exciting, but fails miserably, making it my number 1 least favorite episode of Stargate Atlantis. So, enough of the negativity, time to turn more positive and talk about the best of Stargate Atlantis. But before I get into my top 10, let me name a few honorable mentions that didn't quite make my top 10, but were still great episodes worth mentioning. First honorable mention is Prodigal, the 5th season episode where Michael and his hybrids seize control of Atlantis with a plan to steal Taylor's child and kill everyone else. Next honorable mention is the Daedalus Variation, where Shepard and his team get trapped on a strange, deserted version of the Daedalus that appeared out of nowhere, only to discover it's from a parallel universe, and they end up traveling to multiple parallel universes before finding a way to return to their own universe. And final honorable mention is Enemy at the Gate, the final episode of the series where a Wraith Hive ship gains access to a ZPM and they gain the coordinates to Earth and thus launch a full-scale attack on Earth. Shepard gates back to Earth and to lead the defenses against the Wraith while his team finds a way to gate directly to the Hive ship to try to sabotage it from within, while Woolsey tries to fly Atlantis back to Earth to help in its defense. So now let me get into my top 10 favorite episodes of Stargate Atlantis, starting with my number 10, Aurora. This 2nd season episode where Shepard and his team on board the Daedalus discovered an ancient warship with the crew is still alive in hibernation and exist in a shared virtual reality. Shepard goes into this reality and discovers that the ancients aren't aware of the passage of time nor are on their current situation and are hostile to Shepard, whom they see as an intruder. And on top of that, they have to deal with a wraith that also infiltrated the program. So this was a well executed, exciting episode where we got to see the ancients in real time and Shepard interact with them, and the way they devised this to a virtual reality through their hibernation tubes made total sense, and the wraith infiltration added nice tension to the story, which ended in a bold and satisfying way. Overall, a great episode. Number 9 is The Game, the third season episode where Major Lawrence' team gates to a planet that has Rodney's face on the flag. We come to discover that Rodney and Shepard have been playing what they thought was a game where they build civilizations, but it turns out it was an ancient experiment, and the civilizations they build translated to real life civilizations that followed whatever instructions they were given. So I've always been into playing games like SimCity and The Sims and Civilization. In fact, they're the only kinds of video games I really play. So I was totally gleeful when I saw the premise of this episode, which is something everyone who plays these kinds of games wonders. What if the civilization we're building is actually real? And it was interesting seeing these aspects of Shepard and Rodney's characters reflect in the civilizations that they built. Although it was kind of far-fetched that Rodney and Shepard were playing this game over the years and we just didn't know about it, but whatever, I'm willing to suspend disbelief for the purposes of the plot, which I absolutely loved. And they raised the stakes by making the two civilizations war with each other, which translated from the rivalry of Shepard and Rodney have. So at the same time, it was an exploration of their playful adversarial relationship and the dangers that could occur if that goes out of control, and I absolutely loved it. Number 8 is The Storm and the Eye, the first season two-parter where the Janai, led by Kolya, takes over Atlantis when they're in the middle of experiencing a catastrophic storm. It turns into a die-hard situation when Shepard is wandering around Atlantis unaccounted for, while Kolya has Rodney and Dr. Weir hostage. This is an extremely intense two-parter that instantly established Kolya as a formidable adversary, and the extreme element of the storm only added to the tension. One of the best suspenseful arcs the show has ever managed to pull off, and had me on the edge of my seat the whole time. Number 7 is Poisoning the Well, the first season episode where Shepard and his team encounter a friendly civilization who are trying to build a defense against the race by developing a drug that makes humans immune to wraith feeding. But more than that, it kills any wraith that tries to feed on them. So Dr. Beckett works with them to help develop this cure, but then when they make progress, the leaders are reckless with it and implement it to their entire population, despite the fact that it kills a large percentage of those who take it, and despite Shepard's warning that as soon as the wraith find out about this drug, they'll simply wipe them all out. This was an extremely powerful episode that asked a lot of tough moral questions, but didn't really give any clear answers, as there were none to be had, as it explored the lengths people would go to for survival, and how sometimes when your only choices are all bad, you end up taking one with dire consequences. And this was made even more powerful as Beckett formed a personal relationship with one of the Hoffins, but was helpless to stop them. A very powerful episode. Number 6 is The Siege, the 3-part episode that ended Season 1 and kicked off Season 2. These episodes were absolutely exciting and capped off the entire story that Season 1 had been telling, and transitioned nicely from a story about people being trapped far away from home to a story of Atlantis connected with Earth. And it's about, the Wraith finally launching their full-scale attack on Atlantis and how Weir and her team tried to stop them. First, in a great story about McKay leading a team to an ancient satellite to destroy the Wraith ships, but when they only succeed in destroying one of the ships, the other two are still headed on their way. The situation seems completely lost, but just then a team from Earth comes through the gate, bringing technology that could help them in their defense against the city, until the new ship the Daedalus arrives from Earth, bringing a ZPM. So they simply had to hold out until the Daedalus gets there. These episodes were absolutely exciting, and I felt was a great way to wrap up the storyline of Season 1 while paving the way for what the series would transition to in Season 2. It was also great seeing the character interactions between Shepard and Weir when Colonel Everett came to take command of Atlantis. It was great drama, great action, great suspense, and overall great storytelling. Number 5 is Before I Sleep, the first season episode where they discover an old woman asleep in a hibernation chamber in the city, and apparently she has been there for thousands of years, but then they discover that the old woman is in fact an alternate version of Dr. Weir, who came from an alternate past where the entire Atlantis expedition was killed off upon arrival, but she managed to travel back thousands of years in the past when the ancients still inhabited Atlantis, and she tells an alternate version of events as they happened in her timeline. Now this is the type of strange science fiction time travel story that's right up my alley. I love stories like this, especially when they're done right, and this was a fascinating character story as it was so interesting to see Dr. Weir come face to face with an alternate older version of herself and how it made her realize how important her life and her friends are to her while finding a new way to defend Atlantis. I loved it. Number 4 is Tabula Rasa, the 4th season episode where the entire Atlantis expedition are stricken with a disease where they lose all of their memories and have no idea who they are. This episode followed Rodney McKay, who wakes up with a recording of himself saying that he needs to find Taylor. So when they go on a journey, he meets up with people like Zelenka, Keller, and Carter, who have no idea who they are either, and so they work together to try to complete their task of finding Taylor. While at the same time, Lorne and his men go around stunning everyone that they can see and hold them hostage. I absolutely loved the format of this episode, the way the story unfolded. It was really, put you in the mindset of Rodney and the others who had no idea who they were, while keeping the ultimate goal of trying to find Taylor, which, like them, you had no idea why. And getting back, getting the backstory of finding out how this all happened, sort of interwoven to the current storyline. It was so interesting the way that it unfolded. This was definitely a unique story that was told really well. Number 3 is First Strike, Adrift, and Lifeline, the 3-part episode that ended Season 3 and kicked off Season 4. Now, overall, I wasn't a huge fan of the replicator storyline. However, I couldn't deny how effective this particular story was, where overall, Weir's objections to the military under the command of Colonel Ellis, who commands the new ship Apollo, had these plans to execute a first strike against the replicators, which leads to a retaliation by the replicators, which could very well end up in the destruction of Atlantis. So they decide to fly the city away from the planet, but something goes wrong where Weir is injured and close to death. So it was quite ironic that Weir was the one who suffered the major consequences of this plan that she objected to in the first place. However, Rodney and Keller come up with a plan to revise Weir using the dormant replicator nanites in her system, which of course is very dangerous, but they do it anyway. But this gives Weir the ability to connect with the replicators, which gives them an advantage. So they stage a heist on the replicator homeworld to steal a couple of ZPMs so they can power Atlantis, which is currently adrift in the vast void of space. These episodes were exciting throughout with some very effective storytelling, but I personally liked these episodes over other suspenseful episodes because Dr. Weir's story was pulled off so well here with the tragic ending where she sacrificed herself to save the others by overpowering Oberith. It was just really exciting. Number 2 is Sunday, the third season episode that explored the crew on their day off, but it ended with a crisis situation where 2 crew members were infected by exploding tumors, which leads Dr. Beckett to sacrifice himself so he can save everyone else. Now, I love this episode as it was a down-to-earth character story that focused on the day-to-day, where we see characters we're used to seeing in life and death situations on their day off. And I love how this episode followed a different character in each act. As at first we followed Dr. Weird and Shepard and Ronan, then Rodney, and finally Beckett. And each segment goes back at the start to tell us what the others were up to at the same time during their day off. I love stories that do formats like this one, and thought it was executed very well here, as it went a long way to explore the characters in the show and the relationships that they have with each other. And the ending with the death of a major character like Dr. Beckett was so emotionally powerful. It was pulled off very well, one of the best ways they could possibly send him off. And my number 1 favorite episode of Stargate Atlantis is First Contact and the Lost Tribe. The 5th season 2-parter brought in Daniel Jackson, where the two with Rodney and McKay, where the 2 of them were abducted by a lost tribe of Asgard in order to activate an ancient device that destroys all Wraith ships whenever they enter hyperspace, but also has the added side effect of making all Stargates in the galaxy explode whenever they're used. And at the time that this happened, the Wraith Todd was on the Daedalus, but as soon as he finds out the device was activated, he blames Atlantis for this and takes the Daedalus hostage. So Shepard gains access to a traveler ships and works to get to Rodney and Jackson before Todd does, so he can save them. Now, this was a really exciting, really suspenseful episode that included all the elements that make Atlantis great: strange ancient devices, race, and a race against the clock to stop utter destruction, while also containing some of the best elements that made all of Stargate great, such as Daniel Jackson, the Asgard, and overall suspenseful storytelling. There was never a dull moment in this 2-parter, which was just a non-stop thrill ride with twists and turns I did not see coming, making it my number 1 favorite episode of Stargate Atlantis. So that's it for my top 10 episodes of Stargate Atlantis. Next week I'll be doing my overall review of Stargate Atlantis, which I'll put a link to in the description below once that's up. And I will eventually be doing a top 10 episode video and a review video for Stargate Universe as well as many other videos on many other shows such as Game of Thrones, Star Trek, Mr. Robot, Dark Matter, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.